Hey, Heather, it's Jeff. Is everybody online who has said they were going to be at the meeting? Is Erica going to be joining us or?
Erica said she would be joining us via Zoom.
Right, okay. All right, so we'll wait a few more minutes. Hey, Heather, it's Jeff. Is everybody online who has said they were going to be at the meeting? Is Erica going to be joining us or?
We got her echo, Dave. Erica said she would be joining us via Zoom.
Right, okay. All right, so we'll wait a few more minutes.
Okay, good, we got that.
Hey, Heather, it's Jeff. Online who said they were going to be at the meeting. Is Erica going to be joining us or? Wow, talk about the loop from hell.
This could be a really long meeting if everything's repeated 3 times. Okay, good, we got that.
Heather, it's Jeff. Online. Okay, so here's a test. Is this going to repeat? Yay. All right. Nice job.
Jeff, I'm thinking you can go ahead and start because we do have a quorum. So if Erica joins us, the more the merrier, but for now, I think we're good.
Okay, very good. Let's see, Rich coming back. So, okay, the City of Bowling Green Planning Commission meeting for January of 2021 will now come to order.
Jeff, I'm thinking you can go ahead and start because we do have a quorum. So if Erica joins us, the more the merrier, but for now, I think we're good. Hold on here, we're having the.
Okay, very good. Let's see, Rich
Can you
coming
just-
back. So,
Can
okay,
you
the
mute? I think
City
we
of
need to
Bowling Green
mute
Planning Commission
YouTube.
meeting for January of 2021 will now come to order.
You can go ahead and start because we do have a quorum. So if Erica joins us, the more the merrier, but for now, I think we're good. Hold on here, we're having the.
Okay, very good. Let's see,
Can you
Rich coming
just-
back. So,
Can
okay.
you
the
mute? I think we
City of
need to
Bowling Green
mute
Planning Commission
YouTube.
meeting for January of 2021 will now come to order.
You can go ahead and start because we do have a quorum. So if Erica joins us, the more the merrier, but for now, I think we're good. Hold on here, we're having the.
Okay, very good. Let's see,
Can you
Rich coming
just-
back. So,
Can you
okay.
mute? I think we
City of
need to
Bowling Green
mute
Planning Commission.
YouTube. You can go ahead and start. We do have a quorum. So if Erica joins us, the more the merrier, but for
Somebody
now, I
out
think
there
we're
has
good.
2 things.
Hold on here, we're having the. So YouTube is muted though? Is YouTube muted? I think we
City of
need to
Bowling Green
mute.
Planning Commission.
Everybody needs all the people on Zoom. Yeah, they don't
Go ahead and start.
speak.
We do have a quorum.
Laptop, phone, or somebody out there has 2 things.
Hold on here, we're having the. So YouTube is muted though? Is YouTube muted? I think we need to mute.
Everybody needs all the people on Zoom. Yeah, they don't speak. Laptop, phone, or somebody out there has 2 things.
So YouTube is muted though? Is YouTube muted? Okay, Jeff, let's try this again. Take 2.
Do you want me to call the meeting to order again, or should I just go to the roll?
Roll call's fine.
Okay, Jamie, please call the roll.
Mr. Earhart?
Here.
Mr. Betts,
Here.
Ms. Ennis,
Here.
Mr. McComber.
Here.
Mr. Michael. Mr. Michael,
Unmute, Rich.
Here.
Mr.
Get me?
J. Phillips,
Here.
Mr. K. Phillips,
Here.
Ms. Sleek, and Mr. Spittler.
Here.
Okay, thank you all for being here tonight. We've all received a copy of the minutes from last month's meeting. Did anybody have any changes or revisions that they wanted to request in those minutes? Okay, seeing none, the minutes are approved as read for last month. And before we move on to lobby visitation, I just want to say that I think for tonight, the purposes of tonight's meeting, it's a good idea if anytime one of us goes to speak, that we identify who we are for visibility's sake, because I'm sure my fellow Zoomers are finding it hard to distinguish people who are in the main meeting room, and they're probably having trouble identifying us on the screen. So that way we'll all know who's talking. Plus, I imagine it'll make it easier to transcribe or whatever is done to it, you know, for the permanent record. So that being said, let's move on to, by the way, Jeff Betts here. Moving on to lobby visitation. If there's anyone there in the chamber tonight who wishes to come forward and address Planning Commission. Heather, is there anybody in there tonight?
There are people, all familiar faces. No one's approaching the podium.
Okay. So if no one wishes to come forward, then we will officially close lobby visitation for this evening and go to our public hearing for tonight, which is to review the referral from City Council for the proposed ordinance amendments to sections 150.01 intent, 150.04 compliance with regulations, 150.10 districts, 150.103 application and issuance of zoning certificate, and 150.132 powers of the board, which are zoning code sections related to the proposed new chapter 158 historic and architectural preservation code of the codified ordinances. So we will begin as always with our staff report from Heather.
Thank you, Jeff. I did want to point out before we get started, if anybody is watching this on YouTube, we do have this on our website, the proposed ordinance, bgohio.org. Then you go to the planning department, and then under the Historic Preservation Commission are where you'll find some documents that will be helpful. So the frequently asked questions sheet that you got in your packet, the proposed ordinance, and then a presentation from the State Historic Preservation Office, and I think a couple other documents. So just so people can follow if they need to. But obviously I gave you a big packet, so I don't know if you want me to read every detail, but I'm going to try to do some highlights here and then let you know if we have any questions. So I thought it was good to bring us back to the history of historic preservation. I should say no pun intended. I didn't mean to say it that way, but but in 2009, we had a housing section of the master plan that was updated. And that was the first time we really had the recommendation for historic preservation, the importance of that. Pre that, of course, we have downtown and boomtown, which were definitely important historic features of our community that were first put on the National Register. But since then, 2009 really is a date that we looked at having a recommendation for historic preservation. And I think it was really reignited in 2013 when Mayor Edwards was here, the former mayor, when he invited the State Historic Preservation Office to talk. After that, he did put a historic preservation study committee together that met for at least a year and had a document of this, a very similar ordinance that was introduced to council. And that ended up being tabled indefinitely. So lead us back into some more recent planning documents that we've worked on as a city, which includes the future land use plan that was updated in 2014. And then that had several recommendations about historic preservation. We also have the community action plan, which mentions historic preservation, that initiative being very critical. And of course, our most recent East Wooster Street, a strategy for redevelopment paper talks about the importance of historic preservation. So since then, we've had the Historic Preservation Commission that was actually had their first meeting on March 20th of 2019. So we're getting close to 2 years old now, but they've been working very hard on this proposed ordinance, went through several drafts. Finally, in November, they did put what they felt was the document that they felt was great to introduce to council. They had a presentation in front of City Council on November 2nd of last year now, I have to say, not this year. So again, that was after several months of work on a draft. So they are here tonight, 2 members, or at least three of the 4 members, and they are going to do a quick presentation when I'm done. But again, I thought it was really important to highlight our past planning documents that do recommend historic preservation over and over, and the city really trying to implement some sort of program worthy of moving that recommendation forward. So the function of Planning Commission really is to look at our zoning code and our subdivision regulations. So that's where your authority comes in to this document. Of course, Chapter 158 is a standalone section, but it does make changes to Chapter 150 of the zoning code. So that is why City Council recommended that the Planning Commission review this document. And I think it's important, though, to review the whole document because you can't really get the big picture if you're not looking at 158 and the other line changes. So again, basically the process would be that we have a historic overlay zoning district. So that is the mechanism used for historic preservation. It's very common. You can see it under building codes and other things, but I think the overlay district seems to be the most commonly used one that we have researched, and that's what we thought would work well for Bowling Green, and it made sense. So essentially, if you had a property that you wanted to designate or list, you could do that via this historic overlay zone. Or you can make a district, again, using this historic overlay zone. So the mechanism for that too is once that you would have that zoning mechanism in place, you would then have to issue a certificate of appropriateness for major alterations of the exterior of a property. Again, we're not touching the interior, it's for the exterior. And I know the commission members that will hear will go into much more detail than I did. But really, the goal of the city overall is to become a certified local government. Currently, the city does not have any voice in our local preservation efforts. So if something were to be introduced on the National Register, we would not have a voice in that. So becoming a certified local government would not only give us a voice, but it would also give us access to educational events, grants, basically that state historic preservation office function. Then they really are very helpful. So it just opens up a new door for also state tax credits. So let's say we have a business downtown or a building that they want to modify or alter or change the use, and they want to make some upgrades. They're able to not only get federal tax credits, but also state tax credits. Now we're talking a long way down the road because we don't even have an ordinance. First, you would have to adopt an ordinance, and then from there, you would have to go through a zoning change process. So this, again, we understand this is very complicated. We looked at this for what, a year and a half now. So we don't expect you to digest this very quickly, but we really want to highlight what's important about this and share at least the bones of what this means for Bowling Green. It's been a goal from the commission to become a certified local government because, again, we thought this is the most valuable for our community. Again, I know it's important to the current mayor too, and he's met with us a lot too at our meetings, which we really appreciate. So again, this is critical. We have a lot of communities that have done preservation ordinances for years. And, we've tried to work, I think, with a document that's very flexible. And I know we adapted it a lot since the last draft was done. And I'm sure Les remembers being on that committee and he will mention that. But we thought it was really important to be as flexible as possible and really look at a collaborative body with our owners and really be an advisory role. We want to work with people. So if you want to hit the actual meat of the document, again, I'm not going to go through every page. We did send you an amended version with your packet with 3 very minor changes. And this was essentially due to comments that we received from Will Earhart of the Planning Commission. And also we have a new member named Chris Mowen, and she had a couple comments. She's an architect and she works directly with historic preservation in her profession. So we really appreciated her new view being on that commission. And so she recommended a couple changes. So basically the ordinance reflects her changes that we would clean up. And if you have more changes you want to recommend, we would clean that document up also before sending it to City Council. So, it's a typical ordinance. It's a new chapter. You always have a title, a statement of purpose. We have definitions. And then, of course, we reiterate the goals of the Historic Preservation Commission, their duties and their powers. And then again, I highlighted on page 7, the minor change that Chris requested. On page 9, we also had some rewording that Will suggested. So I wanted to show you that prior language and then highlighted the new language that was suggested. And then on page 11, Chris suggested we remove contemporary design. And so I showed what that looked like and then just having that striked out. And then the ordinance covers the procedures for reviewing proposed alterations and what that would look like. A lot of these sections too are based on the model historic preservation ordinance from the state. We have to have certain criteria met by this ordinance to become a certified local government. So that is why there's a minimum maintenance requirement. There's a penalty. For example, powers and duties, you have to have your makeup of your commission have certain criteria also. So that's why you'll see these sections kind of flow that way because it is a requirement. So then we do some updates of actual zoning code sections. Of course, we have to create the historic overlay zone. We also wanted to clean up the Historic Preservation Commission that is already mentioned in chapter 30. And just we thought that language is very redundant so that we didn't have to repeat it in section 30 along with the new 158. There's also some basic things about city fees. We wanted to make sure we included the fee for what a certificate of appropriateness would be, which we proposed is $25, the same as a zoning permit. And I don't think there's a lot to the zoning code section. Again, it's just explaining what a listed property is and what that actually would become with that historic overlay zone. That the standards would be the Secretary for the Treatment of Interior Historic Properties. That would be the standards and guidelines we would follow. We did assign the appeal process. So let's say somebody came in front of the board and wanted a certificate of appropriateness for a project and they were denied, that would go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Again, we're not suggesting this is going to happen often and we don't want it to. We really want it to be a flexible sort of board that really works with people and provides some guidance. We also thought it was important to include under the building codes, chapter 152, nuisance conditions and demolitions. So basically, before you were to actually demo in a project that could be historic, that it would have to get a COA through the Historic Preservation Commission, unless it was something that really was a nuisance property that it just has to go. So we wanted to have that feature in there. And that I believe was also part of that certified local government program. So again, I know it's a lot. I tried to highlight what I thought was important, but again, the commission members will do their presentation. But I also thought it was important, again, I gave you copies of each of the planning documents that recommend historic preservation. I highlight it. I know many of you probably don't need this because you were involved in many of these planning processes. So you get it. You understand it's really critically important to preserve our history here. And we also included frequently asked questions that the commission did put together. They thought that would be helpful to kind of hit some highlights, not only for the commission, city council, but also property owners that may have some questions. So I think that's it for me, unless you have any specific questions. Otherwise, I'm going to hand that off to our two commission members that are going to do a presentation. Jeff, did you have anything to add?
No, I don't have any questions for you at all, Heather. Does anybody else have any questions for Heather before she tosses it?
No.
Okay, yeah. Fire
Okay,
away.
well, I'm going to share my screen if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Heather did a great job summarizing a lot of what we'll be saying tonight, but we want to share a few more details with you. My name is John Sampin. I'm the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission, and I'll be also working tonight with Les Barber, who's behind me on my right, and Will Raudebusch is here, another member of our commission on on my left. Our fourth member is Chris Moen, who was just appointed, and we're waiting for a fifth member to be appointed by the mayor at some point in the future. So the Historic Preservation Commission, or we'll call it the HPC, was charged with helping Bowling Green celebrate its rich historic past. Just for fun, we'd like to share with you a few important facts, historic facts and photos from the past. This is a map of our town back in 1888. I know many of you have seen this, but it's fun to look at that again. Our nearly 200-year history includes the draining of the Black Swamp in 1860 and our Boomtown housing expansion, which dates from 1887. In our efforts to help preserve our heritage, the HPC hopes to establish in our community a certified local government, referred to as the CLG, which you all are looking at the moment. This is a joint program between the local, state, and federal agencies. In 1916, the United States Congress established the National Park Service within the Department of Interior, which was to be the steward not only of our national parks, but also of our monuments and historic objects. 50 years later, in 1966, Congress enacted the National Historic Preservation Act, significantly increasing the scope and responsibilities of the National Park Service, including the resources of historic, private, and public buildings and homes. In Ohio, specific implementation of these responsibilities was established in 1985 when the National Park Service approved a program in Ohio, which we know of as the Certified Local Government Programs. This enabled towns and cities to enact historic preservation ordinances which establish the legal basis for preserving and enumerating the standards which will apply to preservation efforts. The State Historic Preservation Office in Columbus shares joint administrative responsibilities with the National Park Service. This special program helps identify and protect historic sites and structures, as well as offering financial resources such as tax credits and grant monies. As you've already heard, we've been working on this a long time, nearly 18 months. Our commission's major goal has been to draft the CLG. We've already presented this proposal to City Council, and now we're excited to share this with the Planning Commission tonight. In Ohio, there are 78 certified local governments, including every university town of Ohio except for Bowling Green. We're hopeful that our city will soon join these other communities in passing that ordinance. In spite of our nation's extraordinary and terrible experience with the current COVID pandemic, and with all the activities that are happening today, we believe that the adoption of the CLG ordinance will represent a special moment of hope, opportunity, and civic pride for our community and city. I'd now like to invite Les Barber to highlight a few key points and benefits as you begin this process of reviewing and considering the ordinance. Thank you.
Good evening. Les Barber, 303 North Prospect Street. I want to highlight a few key points and benefits as you engage in this review process. And I would like to add one, I think, important thing to the items that are on slide number 6 here. All residents of Bowling Green, I'm sure, take pride in the distinctive and historic architecture in our city, both in the downtown and in older areas, especially those most heavily trafficked by residents and visitors alike. We take this pride not just for our own sense of pleasure at living in a community with distinctive history, but also because we recognize how important the historic feel of our city is to groups like, for example, the parents of prospective BGSU students, and visitors from out of town who come here for our restaurants, our shops, or maybe for business at the Wood County Courthouse. This means that the appearance of our downtown and the historic corridor areas is critical. So I'm thinking of Worcester Street, east and west, Main Street, north and south, and the Court Street, Prospect Street area around the courthouse. However, these corridor areas are problematic in a university town like ours. A pattern has been visible for years. Historic single-family homes are purchased and become rental units. While some landlords take pains to preserve the historic features of such homes, some do not, so that a progression of neglect and disintegration occurs. And we do recognize, by the way, that some family home owners can be guilty of similar offenses, not only landlords. This ordinance is intended in part, many other reasons, but in part to stop any further loss in the distinctive historic architecture of Bowling Green. Okay, so now to a few key points about the ordinance. What it does, and maybe even more importantly, what it doesn't do. The ordinance in front of you is based on the model, as Heather told you, provided by the State Historic Preservation Office. It also closely follows existing ordinances in cities like Kent and Perrysburg. It establishes the standards and rules for designating protected properties in Bowling Green. And it establishes the standards and rules for owners of duly designated or listed historic properties if they subsequently make substantive changes, if they wish to make substantive changes to the exteriors of their buildings. This is really critical. I think you know this from reading it, but it needs to be repeated. It does not designate or list any property or any district in and of itself. Only after this ordinance is approved by City Council, and only then, could specific properties or districts be recommended for listing and protection. And all of that only by separate legislation of council following all of its usual procedures. So in a very basic sense, this ordinance doesn't change the status of any property in Bowling Green. No requirements or rules are levied on any property owner. The ordinance does only two things. It fulfills the state and national legal requirement that the city have such an ordinance in place before any proposals for protected properties or districts can be considered by the HPC and City Council. And second, it sets standards and rules for such subsequent actions by council and the commission, as well as standards and rules for the treatment of protected properties thereafter. Okay, so that's one big thing. Second big thing is on the topic of standards and rules governing historic properties, once they are designated, there are a number of important things to point out. And these are things that you should be able to confirm as you have been reviewing the document. First is, as mentioned a couple of times, we're talking only about exteriors of buildings, not interiors. Second, to simplify everything, and to avoid the possibility of ambiguities that might arise if we tried to write our own local set of standards, we are recommending the adoption of the Secretary of the Interior Standards. This is the title, Standards for the Treatment of Historic Properties. It's available in your appendix, and I'm sure you've looked at it. These standards, which are the nationally accepted model, were first issued in 1978. They were reissued and codified in 1995, and it's the 95 standards that we're using. I should also maybe quickly point out that we are not proposing any so-called guidelines at all. As the first group committee on which I also served did, was a long, lengthy document They weren't rules. They were guidelines to help people who were planning to make changes to historic properties understand what their options were. But it quickly got misunderstood by a number of people. There was a kind of outcry, and I at least, and I think others think that that was probably the main reason that that ordinance was tabled and kind of forgotten, lost. So we're not doing that. I don't talk about it here, but in the ordinance, there is a reference to the so-called guidelines from the Secretary of the Interior. Anybody can go there online, find out all kinds of suggestions. If you're changing a window, here are your options that would work within the terms of the standards. And we see no reason, at this point at least, to duplicate any of that. Okay, so kind of an aside. So the third thing that I want to emphasize is that, and I hope you recognize this from reading the document, that we modify or soften, you might say, the Secretary's standards, the rules in a number of ways. Modifications that, by the way, take precedence over the standards themselves. So if there's any conflict, it's what's in the ordinance that's binding, not standards. I call your attention to specific examples in section 158.07A, numbers 3, 4, and 6. And I'm not going to take the time to summarize them here. You've read them and you can look at them again. But I do want to emphasize number 3, which says in part in the second paragraph, it specifies that whenever a full replacement of features such as, there are a number of examples, but such as siding or say an awning on a downtown business, when such a change is desired or necessary, the work, and now I'm quoting, must, if possible, move in the direction of greater historical accuracy in design and texture. So I just want to emphasize that. Must, if possible, move in the direction of greater historical accuracy. In other words, you know, what we're trying to do is leave as much flexibility as possible for property owners. And we think we're doing that with softening or modification provisions like this. Okay, and finally, the most important thing maybe to remember is that even after we have an approved CLG ordinance, this one, assuming that we do, and assuming that we have subsequent city council approval of specific individual protected or listed properties or historic districts, this ordinance also makes it clear that no owners of historic properties will be automatically required to do anything to their property. If they choose to make no changes and do only what we would call preservation work, preserving what's there, that will be fine with this ordinance. It states specifically that preservation, as defined in the standards, the Secretary's standards, is a matter for property owners to pursue on their own without application for certificates of appropriateness to the HPC. So that basically concludes my portion of this presentation. John, I think, has one or two other things that he wants to add, and then we're finished, and we'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Les. Before answering your questions, we'd like to address one important point, which may be especially relevant during this COVID pandemic. There are some concerns that property owners from an officially designated historic district might not have the money or the interest in the governing terms of our ordinance. Here are 4 points to consider. First of all, this is just a reminder, as Les just said, that there is not requirements for anything to be done by a property owner unless they want to make a big change. Second, prior to any designation by City Council of a property as officially listed or protected, at least 4 things will have to occur, each of them presenting an opportunity for owners to argue their position. There will be informal discussions among owners within a proposed historic district about the advisability of seeking such listed protected status in Bowling Green. There will be a vote of all owners of property in the proposed district. The HPC can recommend a listing of the district to City Council only if a majority of the owners approve. Third, the Planning Commission, when it considers the listing and creation of the required HOZ or Historic Overlay Zone, will hold a public hearing open to everyone for the expression of opinion. And fourth, City Council will also hold its own public hearing on the creation of the proposed district, open again to everyone. A third point, even if it should become the case that City Council approves the ordinance, for example, on February 1st, a considerable time will elapse between that date and any possible HPC recommendation for the creation of a historic district. This would probably take at least 1 more year, even for areas like Boomtown or Main Street, which have already completed their inventories. The ordinance, if passed by City Council, would not be effective for 30 days. Also, the inventories of the National Register of Historic Places for our Bowling Green, Boomtown, and Main Street are out of date, requiring adjustments and inclusions of specific buildings to be negotiated among owners, then considered by the HPC, and finally inventoried again. All of which is to say that the pandemic will hopefully be long gone before any City Council consideration for a listed protected historic district is realized. And fourth, once we have reached the future point of actually creating 1 or more historic districts, those hesitant or opposed owners whose properties might fall within a district are still protected from any requirement of spending extra money on their properties. This ordinance specifically states that owners who wish to make no change to their properties after the date of listing are not required to do so. We're emphasizing that point. They are free to simply preserve their buildings in their present state. Only if they themselves decide to make alterations as defined in the ordinance will they need to seek a certificate of appropriateness approval from the HPC in order to meet the standards set forth in the ordinance. As you can see, there are multiple protections for individual owners built into this ordinance. Given these facts, we believe now is the time for the city to act on our historic preservation recommendation, which Heather has so ably summarized for you. In our view, the ordinance is a first key step in giving the citizens of Bowling Green the opportunity for legal protection and possible grant funding in preserving the historic features of their properties. We hope that you, as the Bowling Green Planning Commission, will vote your support to help approve the CLG proposal. We thank you for listening, and we're happy at this point to answer or try to answer any of your questions.
Okay, does anybody have questions that they wish to ask at this time? I know I do. I'm looking through my list, so I may be a second here. But if anybody else wants to, please jump in.
Bob McComber here. I've got a question or a comment. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page about this. It's in terms of the designating properties, section 158.06. When I look at the, if you've got multiple properties that are included in a historic district, that's one designation versus the listed property, which is just a single property, right? And in terms of the historic district where there'd be multiple properties, I see that it says, as you mentioned, John, that if a majority of owners in the proposed district vote in favor of the historic district, then the process goes forward. But in the listed property area, I see that although it does say usually it will occur because the property owner asked for it, that there is a provision that it can occur without the property owner's approval. I'm looking at section 158.06 E and F. F says if the commission feels it's of considerable importance to the community as a whole, that an individual property be listed, even if the owner declines to give their written consent, the commission may move forward. I guess it doesn't particularly bother me, but it does seem a little inconsistent in that when we're talking about multiple properties, there's no provision to go forward if a majority of the owners object to the designation. But when you're talking about an individual property, it can go forward without the property owner's consent. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, I think so. I'm not sure that that we have a perfect answer to that question. Our feeling was that if you look at Bowling Green, there are probably, I can think of only one possible example of an individual listed property that is so ingrained in the public imagination beyond Bowling Green, as part of Bowling Green, that maybe it deserves protection, and that's the windmill on Clough Street. If the owner of that property declined to pursue this, we felt that the Historic Preservation Commission should have the ability to recommend it to council. Council would have to decide, obviously. As far as historic districts, there didn't seem, I think, to us to be any exact parallel to that, and therefore we didn't address that possible.
So if the majority of owners within a proposed district don't want to go forward, then it's just a kind of a dead issue. Like I say, it seemed a little, I don't know what the word, I don't mean to be critical. It didn't particularly bother me, but there was a little inconsistency in the treatment.
There is. I don't think we had thought of it before as an inconsistency, but but part of it is, I think, when you're dealing with a large group of people, it seemed less appropriate to us. Maybe the commission should be making a recommendation against the wishes of multiple people. But if it's one individual and there's a convincing argument to council that the thing is indelibly important to the community, that it ought to be considered. I think that's as much.
If I may, this is Nate Spittler. Bob, the points you brought up were my biggest concerns with all this. And I mean, if you look at it from one side, yes, the majority of owners in a historic, my terms right, zone, district would have to approve it. But at the same time, that means that there could be a situation where you have a historic district where 49% of property owners don't want to be involved. And that bugs me a lot. It also bugs me a lot that one individual, even if it is just one, and there's only one in mind right now today, that could turn into 10, that could be one different one a year. It could be any number down the road that don't want to have this designation and this additional regulation, but could be forced into it. So I just want to express my displeasure with that potential, even if it is remote, as it's written. I understand there is, and I get that there's a lot of benefit to being a certified local government, tax incentives, grant money, and so forth. I don't know what, I have not gone into, I don't understand enough what minimum requirements there are to be a certified local government, but I don't like forcing property owners into this designation.
I would agree with Nate. This is Judy Anderson. I have a couple of I guess, clarifications that I need here. And the one in 15806H, you talk about if a council approves the listing, and then if the proper designation is disapproved by council, the commission, which I'm assuming is you gentlemen, may, after a period of 60 days, resubmit the proposal to council for reconsideration. But there's no I mean, how many times can you resubmit it? And doesn't there have to be changes in it? Or do you just keep resubmitting the same proposal until we get new council members or something? I mean, where's the ending date on that?
Yeah.
It's on page 10.
158.06H.
It's on page 10.
I don't think that we thought about that in any very specific way, and it might be that a limit on the number of resubmissions would be appropriate. I personally wouldn't have any problem with that.
I would think city council would appreciate that because they could hear the same one
Right.
forever. Along those same lines, now on number 8 for the Board of Zoning Appeals, which most people know is very close to my heart. You talk about if a 2/3 vote of the Board of Zoning Appeals should be required, will be required to overturn a decision of the commission. Then does that 60 days submission, can you come back to the Board of Zoning Appeals to resubmit it? I will tell you that the Board of Zoning Appeals always says, at the end, we always say, if you're not granted your request, you may have the option of taking it to the Court of Common Pleas. But if we're finding for the individual, you would be the people that would have to take it to the Court of Common Pleas, the commission. So how is that? I mean, how much authority does the Board of Zoning Appeals have in this?
Well, it ends it.
Yeah, I would think so.
It ends it.
And so
But I guess the way it's written, the commission, it wouldn't necessarily be out to the other people.
right,
years
right,
from now,
I
but
understand
the
that.
commission could file again if it felt it had reason for doing it after 60 days. Presumably, that would have to be good reason. I can't imagine what it could be. I mean, some total change of ownership, maybe, I don't know, but it basically it ends it.
Okay, so because why I'm asking is if you live in you have deed restrictions, for example, where you're living, the Board of Zoning Appeals does not overrule your deed restrictions. We do not have the authority to do that. So what you're saying is the ZBA has the authority to overrule what you're saying.
On
Yes.
a certificate of appropriate.
2/3 of the ZBA, yes.
Yes,
Make
we,
sure
we
we're-
can, so the
make sure we
ZBA,
know what we're talking about.
Yeah,
We're talking
this-
about the
yeah,
certificates of
right,
appropriateness for a
right.
particular case.
So then that, not we, but the board has the final authority on that. Okay, thank you.
I do want to go back to H. I mean, I guess I would argue devil's advocate that if you tie someone's hand with limitations, what if I was a champion of my street? Like, I want my street to be on it and I'm not successful because a lot of the street, they don't want it. Well, 10 years from now, I've got new neighbors. They're great. They love historic properties and they want to resubmit with me and I got to 60%. I mean, I would think having a limitation on that is shooting ourselves in the foot because what's the point? I mean,
Well,
what would be the
I think
point?
if you have changes in it,
Right. Oh,
then that should be part of H, you have to resubmit with changes.
well, yes and no. I mean, if I
Instead of
want to
keeping
take control of
resubmitting.
my street and it's really important to me because I want to keep my property values up.
I would suggest you just put in appropriate changes.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just putting devil's advocate there if you want it to be a community building tool.
There might not be changes though. I think that'd be the concern. It might be that 10 years down the line with no changes, it's now appropriate or, maybe it passes with a new council or something like that. That part doesn't bother me. It's difficult for me to imagine a group of, citizens appointed to the commission combined with it who would repeatedly bring a property up to be repeatedly voted down by council. And if it was actually an issue with council, we have, it takes time, but we have elections and they could be replaced. So I agree that it could be abused without putting a limit on there, but there's no way to avoid, as we see today, there's no way to structure things such that they can't be abused. So this one in particular seems like think the value of being able to resubmit down the line outweighs the potential for abuse.
Could it be, and this is Joe Phillips, and more on a per annum basis for resubmission? Instead of, hey, every 60 days, hey, after you've gone through X amount of, I could say rejections, that it moves to a yearly basis on something with no changes.
This is Les Barber. The only thing, I don't think we can say anything specific about it tonight, but we do have a meeting on the 22nd. And I can promise you that we will bring this up and consider possible amendments of the sort that have been suggested. And if we agree on an amendment, then we will forward that to City Council.
Thank you.
Jeff Betts jumping in here. You folks have all touched on points that I had notes on as well, but I want to go back to this idea that, it seems like in parts of this document, but I'm sorry, before I say anything else, I just want to again say, as I did at your meeting that I attended, that my hat is off to you folks for all the work you have put into this. It's mind-boggling to me what you've created, and I really respect that. But I, like these other folks, I do have some issues, and my issues all really center around this idea that there's an individual or a property owner out there who does not want to participate. And I think there are a number of loopholes in this document as written that put them at the mercy of their neighbors. And I think that's unfair. If someone has already purchased a property, to come in retroactively and say, no, now it's this. So I want to get back to a question that I asked at your meeting, which is, and I saw in the document that a district or a zone, I'm not sure which is the appropriate term, can be as few as 2 properties. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so why does it have to be, why are we thinking in terms of a whole street at this juncture? Why can't we be thinking about building little patch squares in relevant zones in the city of Bowling Green that eventually become a full-fledged quilt? I think it's a mistake to think that we need to go out and, make a huge zone with unwilling participants to create that. And I know you guys are saying, well, we wouldn't do that, but it's like, well, what if, using Heather's example of, I'm somebody and I want to protect I think I'm protecting my block. I think what's really required and what would address a lot of these issues is that it has to be, whatever is submitted to you folks for approval, consideration, it has to be by unanimous vote, so that there is nobody included in that particular zone that has not said, absolutely 100%, I'm here, I want to do this. And they're willing to take on that financial responsibility. And I hear what you're saying about we've made this a lot, it's pared down considerably from the previous draft and all that, and I can see that's true, but there is still perhaps an additional layer of cost that's involved with this kind of work. And if you're not interested in doing that, I think it could become, a burden. And I also think there ought to be something in this document, and maybe it's just a statement that says, once you've agreed to this and you're on board, you can't get out. But if there is to be an appeal process, if somebody were to sign up and their house has not been declared, an official on the registry of historic monuments or whatever, but they wanted to back out of the certified overlay zone, we need to say that that's either possible through an appeal process or it's absolutely not possible. So once you do this, you're committed to it. But I think those kinds of changes in various, paragraphs would be very useful and would rule out the possibility that somebody is unwillingly going to be, included. And I also, I wanted to ask a couple questions about some of the terms. So,
Could I make a response to that?
the non-contributing properties, is that the official term for someone who's included in the zone who does not wish to make, does not wish to involve themselves with the historic preservation?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't mean that.
Okay,
It means that a contributing property is one that doesn't meet the standards for that particular historic district, whatever those standards are. So it's still part of the district. It's still governed by some of the rules, but it does not have historic features.
but as envisioned in this document, is that non-contributing property a willing participant or somebody who they've signed up and said, we want to be part of this zone?
Could be or not. Could be yes, could be no.
Okay, is there an official designation for those people who might, under the, as written right now, the simple majority vote, who would be included in a zone that actually don't want to participate? What is the terminology for those people?
There is no term.
Okay, well, I think that needs to be identified, or these other changes should be incorporated,
Well-
because that is a very real possibility.
I think once this is put in place and we have designated historic overlay zones, then property owners coming in to buy will know that. But we can't imagine at this point until we have that. I mean, if a property owner wanted to buy a historic property, great. If they don't want historic property, then they don't buy on that block. But how do we get to that point where we have 10 houses on a block that are all historic, but one person just refuses to participate? So we have 9 out of 10 that are voting yes, and we allow that one individual to not participate. That's a problem. We haven't got an answer for that.
I don't understand why it's a problem.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the person is going to age out of the home. And as has been suggested, at some point, it can become part of that district if it's resubmitted. You can't reasonably expect that to be forced on them when they've purchased the home with one set of assumptions, or the business, whatever it is. And now all of a sudden we're saying, no, it's this. Sorry.
I have a,
Les Barbers, couple of things. And Jeff, you said at the very beginning, you implied that you thought this ordinance takes a stand about the size of a district. It takes no stand at all about the size of any district. It is true that we have a couple of existing districts in Bowling Green that are on the National Register of Historic Places. And so there's some kind of presumption that those people in those areas might want to seek protection under this ordinance. But this document does not presume to say that there should be a district of any particular size. It only says that have to be at least 2 properties. The second thing, I think in the end, it's, I guess John was saying this, really, it's a question of what's good for the community as a whole. All over the country, there are areas of cities that are historic as areas. That's true. I mean, it's true all over the country. And we believe that there's an advantage to the city in having the possibility of creating a protected historic district, even if one or more individuals in that district are not in favor of the motion. It just comes down to that, comes down to what is the best plan for the city of Bowling.
I have a,
Bob McComber here. Let me ask this question. If we're talking about a proposed historic district and say it has 10 or 12 properties on a block, and somewhere in the middle there's one person that has a property that really is not historic, or they don't want to be involved, could that problem be solved by having two smaller historic districts and just leaving out the one property. You know, you have a historic district that covers 5 properties, then you've got one property that is not part of the district because it's not, let's say it's not historic. Then you have another historic district with 4 or 5 or 6 more properties.
If that property, in that example, Bob, this is Les Barber again. If that property is not a historic property, I think you said,
Mhm.
okay, then, yeah, I would say that would be an obvious way to deal with the issue.
And that's what we already have with the Boomtown area and with the downtown, correct? There are
Right,
some buildings that are
Yeah.
not deemed historic within those districts.
And that's goes back to Jeff's point. Sorry, Nate Spittler here. And then Will, I do want to recognize you. You've been trying to talk and I see you and you get the floor next. But I don't see why we can't do it a bit patchwork, as Jeff has mentioned, and again, avoid encumbering property that people don't want, the owner doesn't want the additional regulation on. And then we still accomplish something, and eventually a future property owner and that gap in the zone could, if property is going to change over at some point, and a future owner could want to jump in. And there does need to be a designation to delineate these non-contributing properties. And if they're within a zone, maybe they're exempted out, something needs to be addressed there. Jeff already mentioned that.
Well, how do we deal with the problem, John Sampson again, how do we deal with the problem where a property owner bought a historic home because they want to live in this district and their neighbor decides to put on a porch in front that is absolutely out of style with that particular area? It diminishes that
To answer
person's.
your question, I think style's in the eye of the beholder, frankly. I don't know.
Well, it depends. I
that's-
mean, if they put up a steel porch that is not anywhere near the historic overlay that's already been there, and it doesn't fit, it diminishes that either that the historic owner's sense of well-being. So we're penalizing that person, or it diminishes the property value if historic value of that home is.
So we're going to encumber the neighbor. So my house, I can't do what I want with it because my neighbor doesn't like what I do with it.
We already
Gotta
have,
stop
we,
you
are-
right
No,
there,
no,
'cause we already-
there's-
I don't like that at all.
It's not a matter of just the individual taste. There's what's called an inventory of all of the buildings in a historic district. The inventory would describe the historic features of the house, the period of time in which those historic features fit. And so it would be a question of whether the porch in this example fit with the qualities of that historic feature. Not just a matter of somebody's taste at the moment.
If I may, I think what they're saying is we're not telling someone that they can or cannot build a porch. We're just saying that if you build the porch, that it has to be in character with the house and the context of that neighborhood, which would be similar to what we already see in some of the condominium complexes in town that have HOAs, which of course these private residences wouldn't have an HOA. But you know, if anyone has ever been to Charleston, now that's historic preservation at a whole other scale, where any brick practically that you replace on the building is controlled by the Historic Preservation Board. I'm slightly exaggerating, but that's not what we would be talking about here. Just that, you know, you couldn't build on a house that's made of stone. You wouldn't come in and put tin around your porch, something like that. So it's not dictating what people can do with the footprint of the building. It's just saying that the materials and that kind of thing have to be sensitive to the character of the house in the neighborhood.
Absolutely understand that. But when you buy a house with an HOA or a condo
You
with
know
an
in the
association, you buy it going in knowing that it has that. You don't get that thrust upon you after you moved in and bought the house and have had it for years.
Absolutely. Yep.
Is this the kind of discussion that would go to the zoning board? Like, I want to build the fence that I want. No, it doesn't fit within these parameters. And you would literally come to the zoning board and say, can we have a variance? And we would say the same thing. You have to provide a hardship. Tell us what your hardship is, why you can't stay within these confines. And if we said, yeah, we agree with you, you don't have to do it, you wouldn't have to do it, or we would say, yes, we think you don't have a hardship, you didn't prove it adequately enough to us. Is that where something like this would end up?
Yeah. The fence is a good example, I guess. If somebody decided they wanted to put a chain link fence around the front of their front yard for a home that was built in 1890, let's say, of a particular historic style, I'm sure that the commission would say, no, you can't do that. It would try to jawbone with the owners. Wouldn't you do this? Couldn't you do that? Here's something that would not be much more expensive, blah, blah, blah. But if the agreement couldn't be reached, and finally the commission had to say no, and the owner appealed it, the Board of Zoning Appeals, yes, would have to decide, is the commission right that it was within its responsibilities, area of responsibilities to making this decision, or is there a hardship or whatever you're used to doing?
Okay.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes.
The other thing that's a potentiality is, which might alleviate the concerns that you were bringing up, Jeff, would be grandfathering in current owners. And then the future owner would then fall under the new historic preservation restrictions, but the current owner would not be subject to that. That could potentially alleviate putting what could be perceived as a burden on an owner, or an assumption that they didn't go into buying their property understanding.
That's a great point, Chris. And that was actually one of the notes I had made to myself. I wanted to ask about the whole grandfather approach. So, I mean, something like that to me seems far more equitable to that outside person who is not interested at this, at this juncture with the house they've purchased under a different pretense, as opposed to a future owner. And obviously it would still meet the objective of creating that footprint. I did want to go back to what I'm sorry, Jeff Betts. I keep forgetting to identify myself. To what you were saying, Les, that I know that the document itself doesn't argue for large size, but all the examples that you guys are using are all about large size, like full streets and, one person, not wanting to go along. So, I mean, you are already thinking in a larger scale. And again, I want to stress, I think that, I think it's great that you guys identified a, 2 property minimum for a district, because I think that's an excellent place to start. And obviously there's plenty of flexibility around for anybody who wants to also participate in that. I want to go back to something that Judy brought up, and that is, I have a real big question mark about whether or not that these kinds of considerations should fall to the Zoning Board of Appeals. I really kind of feel like, because there is more of a financial stake involved here, that these kinds of hearings ought to go either directly to City Council or a special subcommittee of City Council that is created specifically for that. I really think it's important for this to be handled by elected officials, people who have been put in those roles by the general population of Bowling Green, and not, volunteers who are serving to assist the city. I mean, it's a huge responsibility that has financial consequences, and the kinds of decisions that Judy and her folks make right now, it's more about, they may say no, but somebody's not going to get a $500 fine or something like that. So, I mean, there's no financial penalty attached to it. Whereas these kinds of hearings would definitely have some kind of penalty attached to it. And I also think that, depending on what's determined finally with what kind of vote is required to create a district of the people who are submitting, the request to you, that the City Council would be the ones to have the hearing for somebody who says, I'm sorry, I do not wish to be included in this, if it came to that.
Well, and one last comment I'll add to that is the thought that was popping into my head when you guys were talking about excluding certain properties from a zone is gerrymandering. And if it works for voting purposes, I don't see why it couldn't work under these circumstances as well.
Yeah, I think I want to emphasize. I think that there's a tension I hear in our comments between the individual and the community, right? So I think having a historic district is going to be really good for the community. I think we need one. Getting to have one in the first place, since we don't have one now, and we do already have lots of buildings, is going to present certain challenges. And I think inevitably, some people probably aren't going to be happy. Two thoughts on that. One, I'd suggest as planning commission, our job is not to protect individual landowners, and that should be city council considering those types of things in terms of, is this, who are we going to upset, et cetera. I think our job is to evaluate these, the proposal and think, would this be good for the community as a whole? Certainly, I mean, you can tell I generally think they would be. I also do want to say, though, that I do think these are designed to protect individuals. So when we talk about, we seem to be talking about it as though this is going to prevent some existing, property owner from doing what they want with their house, I guess is what we're saying about it. But it also protects the individual who lives next door to the crazy person, right? And if who's already invested in that and somebody buys it and moves in a year later and they start going crazy and they completely change the character of the neighborhood that you already live in, that you already invested in. And that's why something like gerrymandering or why a 2-house patch, et cetera, from my perspective, is actually a terrible idea. That doesn't preserve a neighborhood at all. That just preserves a particular property. So I think it protects individuals just as much as not having one. Because if you invest $300,000 in a historic property on Wooster Street, and then next year somebody buys the one next to you and goes bananas, right? You're going to be looking around saying like, oh, I wish I had a historic district, to protect me and my rights, So I do think that you can look at it in a lot of different ways. And from my perspective, our job here on Planning Commission is very much to just kind of get us to the point where we can have one of these districts. And then as we're trying to navigate, individual disputes that come up, that's going to be handled by, the elected officials who are going to be involved in the city council. And in terms of the grandfather idea, I also just want to go on the record as also having had that idea earlier in this. And I just suggest that if we do that, you don't make it you don't make it an unlimited grandfather, but you either grandfather in the program itself, so you give landowners a chance to, a historic district has to phase in, so you give people a chance to get out of town if they don't want to be there, or you have a cap on 5 years, 10 years, something like that, into which a property is not subject to the district, but then automatically becomes it versus 40 years later via death or sale or something. Anyway, sorry, I had a lot bottled up there over time.
Yeah, and one idea I had is it sounds like, and this is Joe Phillips, what I'm hearing is we have this, the idea of a district or an overlay zone tied in together with a listed property. So to me, the zone outlays, okay, these are the properties we foresee as being historic, okay? And if the zone says, and as we talk in terms of restrictions, and maybe to flip the script a little bit and say, okay, the city says these are the areas we want to be a historic overlay zone. And that allows individual property owners within that zone the opportunity to list themselves voluntarily and to see how that plays out, taking in also the capacity of possibly grandfathering it down the road as sales progress. So instead of looking as a restrictive idea, is that it's an opportunity that, okay, we have set up these areas for these individual homeowners that now have the opportunity to opt in and list their individual properties and partake in any benefit that is afforded them under this zoning. you know, maybe we have everybody flocking into it at that point, assuming there's like not thorough on the complete benefit of it, but I have to assume there is benefit to this, not only for the city, but for the individual. And it fixes itself for the most part. Now you'll start to see again, this kind of patchwork is people do or don't. But if there's a grandfather clause, you know, for sales, then it starts to move itself in that direction eventually. Just a thought.
I think we can look at that and discuss that a little bit in our committee. Thank you.
Jeff Betts again, full disclosure, I did not mean to imply, piggybacking on Chris's comment originally, that I had the thought about the grandfathering. I had a question about grandfathering. I had not taken it to that level. So I just want to be totally honest on that. I think the grandfathering and incentive is those are great ideas. So from my perspective anyway. So, okay. Who else has questions or comments for these folks? Anybody?
This is Judy. I think we've given you some of our thoughts and suggestions that you can go back and look at this. Obviously, the city council is going to have the ultimate approval in it, but our job here was to look at some things that we found questioning, we were having a problem with, and maybe you could redo them or clarify them before you take it to city council. It was not meant that, gee, we're not going to let you take this to city council because with this and this and this is wrong with it, but just
Sure.
move it forward and take into consideration these suggestions. And that's what they were, was suggestions.
John Sampen again. We appreciate your sparring with us a little bit because we anticipate that there will be more down the road. But you know, we're not doing this to help ourselves. We want to see Bowling Green continue to be a great city, and we have a lot of history to celebrate. And we're in danger of losing homes and losing buildings, losing downtown. I would love to see the theater be preserved in some way. So we're looking for ways of helping our community, and we need your help to do that. So we do appreciate your interest, and hopefully you will appreciate and back our final draft. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
So that brings us to the public testimony in our public hearing. Is there anyone there in the room tonight? Or Heather, did you receive any emails or letters from the community of people who wish to weigh in on this issue or ask questions?
No, we did not receive any written correspondence. I can't confirm if anybody in the audience wants to talk. We did have one call on Monday from a woman that wants to move back here from Los Angeles, and she was thrilled to hear from her parents that we have a historic preservation ordinance on the books. So I thought that was re-encouraging that, you know, someone like that really is excited to move here, loves this town, and wants us to preserve it. But that's it.
Okay. And so is there, I guess I want to say I'm officially calling for anyone who's in the room there tonight who wishes to come forward and ask questions or comment on this topic to come forward at this time. Okay, so I'm not seeing anybody. So that just leaves it to us now to, I guess, continue or conclude our discussion and decide what we want to do in terms of recommending or not recommending this for City Council. So what's the thinking at this point?
But I don't know who wants to take the first stab at this, but
Go ahead.
I think there's several things were brought up, whether it's the grandfathering in or how the overlays, there's some things that need to be fleshed out in this. I don't think it's a bad idea. I am not overly opposed to it. in general, I think there are multiple things that need to be clarified, corrected, whatever the right word is, before I would be for this.
Well, I thought I heard, Bob McComber, I thought I heard John and Les say that they have a committee meeting on the 22nd. And we gave you some topics that you want to discuss at that meeting, and that might evolve into some changes in the document, might not. But I think we should give you an opportunity to review it again and see if you want to change anything before we actually, take a vote on whether whether we want to recommend it to city council or not. I think it would be inappropriate to do so right at this time. We should probably put it, back on our calendar for next month.
Table it.
Table it for a month, if that's the right term.
Yeah, we'd like to let city council know they've already scheduled the public hearing for February 1st for this ordinance. So I assume that's okay to change.
Jeff Betts speaking. I think that is an awesome suggestion by Bob. And I would, why don't we take a quick roll call vote on that idea? So I move that we table our vote on whether to approve or not approve the document, or approve our recommendation to city council until our next meeting. Is there a second?
Second it. This is
Okay.
Judy, I'll second it.
Heather, or Jimmy, can you take a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Earhart,
No.
Mr. Betts,
Yes.
Ms. Ennis,
Yes.
Mr. McComber,
Yes.
Mr. Michael,
Yes.
Mr. J. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. K. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Spittler.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes 7-1. So we will table our discussion, or I guess we would call it a continuation of this discussion, or a new continuation of the public hearing for next month's meeting, after we've had a chance to review any changes that may come forth after the Historic Commission's next meeting. All right, that brings us to, by the way, that was a great discussion, and I think, it's obvious everybody has really sunk their teeth into this, and it's pretty complex material. So I know I really appreciate it, and I'm sure the city really appreciates it as well. So that brings us to the last official item on our agenda tonight, which is our reports. Judy, do you have anything you can tell us about last month?
I do. The Zoning Board of Appeals met on December 9th. We had 3 variance requests. The first one was a Justin Donhauser at 260 Buttonwood Avenue, who requested a variance to allow the construction of a 6-foot tall fence in the 25-foot front yard setback. It's a corner lot. The fence would be in the front yard that faces Pearl Street, which would be 2 feet taller than the maximum allowable height of a 4-foot. After much discussion, and the zoning board's big concern was the visibility. As you came to the corner, if the fence was there, if you could see all oncoming traffic. We tabled this for our meeting next Wednesday. So when we could get better reports from the city, and we could do a better job of going out there and trying to see if we could see around where he had suggested the fence. So we will take that up next Wednesday. The next one was Paul Quapic had requested a variance to allow the construction of a 33-inch by 60-inch, 13.75 square foot monument sign that would exceed the 14 square foot total maximum sign aggregate by 13.5 square feet for Garden Grove Townhouses at 1005 North Grove. That was unanimously granted. The third one was for Cassandra Moss at 610 Kenwood Avenue, who has requested a variance to allow the construction of a 6.5 foot times 23 foot porch, which would encroach 10 feet into the 25-foot required front yard setback. And that was also unanimously granted. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Judy. Heather,
I have no formal report unless you have questions.
any questions for Heather? Actually, Heather, I do have one. So if any of us as an aide in the Historic Planning Commission's, in their meeting, their upcoming meeting, how do we submit any notes we might have? Because we've covered a lot of terrain. So I assume if any of us had specifics that we wanted to email to them that might be interested in their review and consideration, how would we go about doing that?
If you could please email me and
okay.
I will interface with them. I'm also at their meetings. We do have the option that you can attend their next meeting, January 2nd at 3:00.
January
via
2nd?
Hang on.
January 2nd?
January 22nd. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
I'm sorry.
I was like, well, we missed that.
But they have Zoom option too. So in person or Zoom, just let me know if
Sure.
you'd like to attend.
But so is that their very next meeting or are they meeting next week?
Their next meeting is January 22nd.
Oh, okay. All right. Great. All right. So if we were to get you those emails by next week, that would be good timing because you could still forward them to them far in advance of that 22nd meeting.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, I will definitely plan on doing that. And I encourage the rest of you guys to do that as well, because again, we threw a lot at them and I'm sure it would be helpful as reference points. So, all right. That being said, thank you all for being here. Happy New Year and meeting adjourned.